Folks, Roland Martin here for Be Woke Vote and Roland Martin Unfiltered. We are coming to you live from Jackson, Mississippi, and where we are is quite the historic place. This is the Grand Lodge here, Prince Mason's Grand Lodge here in Jackson, Mississippi. It is where the NAACP, they have had their office here since this building opened in 1955. Medgar, of course, the field secretary, his office was here on the floor right above us. And this is the auditorium where lots of history was made, not only for African Americans, but also to America. Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, they met in this particular auditorium as well, where they chose those delegates who went to Atlantic City in 1964. And also the funeral of Medgar also took place here on June 15th, 1963, 3 days after he was assassinated in his driveway on June 12th, 1963. Joining us right now is someone quite familiar with these surroundings. He is the president and CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson. Also, of course, previously was the Mississippi State Conference president. So, man, how's it going?
Pretty good. How you doing? Thank you for being here.
So before we talk about voting, you know, a whole lot of our history has happened in this place we're in right now.
You know, the beautiful thing about this building, many people may not recognize, we made democracy work for African Americans out of this building. Not only was the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party founded in this building, but the Conference of Freedom Organizations. It was an umbrella group of the NAACP, CORE, SNCC, and SCLC during the Civil Rights Movement to force the question of full citizenship. Cortland Cox, one of my mentors, was over the SNCC Legacy Project. He typically said that in Mississippi, we forced the question that black folks could, in fact, have the right to vote. And we went to Selma, then to Lowndes County, Alabama, to make sure we could control the vote. And that's what we're talking about today. How do we control the vote of African Americans to elect an individual who will be accountable to our needs and interests?
Well, it's also being here. It's also a question of partnership for Prince Hall Masons to allow, for the NAACP to be in this facility, and then for it to be the central meeting place where people knew they could go and organize. People talk about safe spaces today. Right. I mean, this was one of those safe spaces for black folks in the 50s and 60s.
One of three places in the state of Mississippi where black folks could convene and discuss issues of freedom and civil rights. Here, Tougaloo College, my alma mater, and Mary Holmes College is currently closed, but this was one of the places that we could actually meet. The unique history of this space is not that it's a partnership. It was the M.W. Grand Stringer Lodge Prince Hall affiliate who started the NAACP, not only in Mississippi, but when W.B. Du Bois and William O. Trotter called for a meeting in Niagara, they wanted to make sure that it was somebody from Mississippi in the room, so they paid for a member to attend that meeting. Her name was Ida B. Wells. And ever since she came back and gave the report, we've been in the bylaws of M.W. Grand Stringer Lodge. We can't move the build office if we wanted to because they see us as an auxiliary of their work.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wow.
It is the only one that I know. When I took position, I remember the Grand Master of the Lodge, he asked me to come down. He said, "Boy, do you know why you're here?" I said, "Well, I'm just coming up to the office." He said, no, you need to understand why you're here. And he laid the history out. And I was floored. And then he said, "Hand me that piece of paper." It was the bylaws. We are in their bylaws. And so with that rich history, I understood completely that I'm a part of a continuum of freedom fighters who charged with responsibility to advocate for the needs and interests of our community and to make democracy work.
When we talk about making democracy work, we just saw Stacey Abrams not concede, but make it clear that she is going to fight for voting rights there in Georgia. You look at what happened in Florida, Andrew Gillum losing by less than 35,000 votes as well. And I made this point on my show, and you were on. You know, if Broward County and Miami-Dade County, if we had voted 65, 70% turnout, that changes the game in Florida. You know,
the number one thing to fight against vote suppression is voter turnout. You know, vote suppression is the problem, but if we increase turnout, it's less of an issue. This is a game of inches, not miles, and every vote count. But what's ironic, 28 years ago, from last week Tuesday, we was dealing with the 2000 election issue, voting machines and vote suppression. And despite over $100+ million to upgrade our machines, we're right back here 28 years
18
later.
Years.
2000?
2000. So
I'm going
back, yeah, 2000.
18 years, right.
And that's the thing that it amazes me when, well, first of all, people don't understand. People don't understand that elections in this country are not federal elections.
No.
They're not even state elections. They are local. When we say local, they're not even city elections. They literally are, matter of fact, it's not even county elections. That thing goes precinct by precinct. I mean, so you might go in one precinct and it's a whole different thing that's happening compared to the next precinct. I mean, my parents worked elections. They worked them in Houston, and I worked them in Dallas County, in the area of Dallas. And they take that job very seriously. But when you hear these stories of, well, one person over here being told one thing, and another person being told, oh, this person over here being new, and ballots got misplaced, stuff along those lines. I mean, this is the fundamental problem I think still facing us, and it makes no sense to me.
Not at all. You know, on election night, I was in Atlanta. We filed 3 lawsuits on election night because of the administration of the election procedure for specific precincts. We need a federal election system. In fact, our election system should be a matter of national security, and that's why Congressman Thompson will be coming forth with a bill
Benny Thompson.
to make sure that it is a matter of national security. When we have a foreign nation tampering with our elections, when we have inconsistent voting machines, when we have a company like Diebold, who's nothing more than a tool of the conservative movement to manipulate outcomes, there's no way to have accountable access to whether or not your vote as you cast it represent the integrity of your interests. All those things are important to address in order for us to have a functioning democracy.
One of the things that also I think when you talk about getting people to understand, so obviously filing those lawsuits, making sure the machines work, making sure people are properly trained. But I also think that what we have to do is connect these dots for people who really don't understand. I was earlier. I went to the home of Medgar and Merle Evers, and I'm driving, and I know I hit at least about 30 potholes.
That's all.
Right. And the thing is, what people don't understand is, so somebody may go, oh man, okay, complaining about a pothole. Well, the question is that a city?
That's right.
Is it a county? Who's responsible for it? People not understanding that when you think about the census, that has a direct impact on dollars that are then appropriated to states and counties for things like roads. I mean, we can go down the line, and so I can go through every. In fact, there was one I was driving and I went over a speed bump. Well, first of all, you just can't put a speed bump on a city street.
That's right.
Some politician, some bureaucrat had to approve that speed bump on that street. And so I think in many ways it's trying to connect the dots of people to understand that you may think that you're living off the grid, as if your life isn't impacted by politics. That is nonsensical.
The air we breathe is a result of public policy consideration to make sure it's fresh air or air that will poison us. Everything we do. You know, you talk about the census. That's our next project, NACP. That was an argument, and many of us talk about the 3/5 debate. That wasn't about whether or not we were human or not. That was about whether or not the federal appropriation would follow the individuals after the count would take place. And the deal was cut for northern states and southern states. The northern states said, we're not going to give you money for individuals you consider property, but you want to count as people. The southern states, well, we're not going to pass this set of legislation. Compromise. Well, if you count them as 3/5, not a whole person, and give us 3/5 of the money per person, then that's a deal. They cut the deal. It wasn't about people. It wasn't about values. It was about money. In a democracy, our vote is our currency, and that currency needs to be leveraged collectively to ensure that our streets are paved, to make sure that our tax dollars are serving our interests, but most importantly for African Americans, to make sure we are owners of government and not victims of government. You can only own government if you participate and leverage your vote.
There's a runoff, obviously, here in Mississippi, November 27th. Mike SP is running against, of course, incumbent Cindy Hyde-Smith. You've been quite vocal. You don't endorse candidates, but you do blast those who say some crazy stuff that impacts black folks. And when you have this incumbent Republican senator lauding someone who endorsed her, talking about public hanging, and then, of course, then to hear her joke about voter suppression, quite troubling for somebody who's supposed to be representing all Mississippi residents. You know,
I'm a graduate of Tougaloo College, and I'm a proud graduate of Tougaloo College. The motto of that school is where history meets the future. And what we are witnessing is the history of a demagogue and racial hate germinating from the White House, that the public policy in the South, as it is in many parts of the country, is dictated by race, religion, or region. You put a racial conversation in front of a policy opportunity, white folks will pick the race argument over the policy opportunity for them every time. You put red meat out there to generate your base to turn out to vote, they go for it every time. I've always said, working class whites are the most brainwashed people in this country, not African Americans.
Oh, hold on, but they swear we're on the plantation. That's the language they always use.
You know, I hear that nonsense, but I see the reality. You know, think about 2005, 6, and 7. The argument was, let's privatize Social Security. And you had all of these conservatives rushing behind that. Had we privatized Social Security, many of those same white individuals would have been devastated after the 2008 stock market crash because of the housing market debacle. They would say, well, we need a free market. Well, that free market also created the banking crisis we've seen during that time. But you put a racial argument in front of them. You put a moral, religious argument, same-sex or women's rights to choose. They vote against their interests in lieu of the bait and switch game that's in front of him. That's what Cindy Hyde-Smith is doing, and that is reprehensible. And for us as African Americans, we must right-size the conversation, push through the noise, and turn out the vote so she couldn't get in office. Not that I'm endorsing anybody, but that behavior we completely fight against.
And look, what a lot of people don't understand, and I've covered this in numerous times, we're in Mississippi. If you're the senior senator from Mississippi, you get to sit at the desk of Jefferson Davis.
Absolutely.
Who I call the greatest domestic terrorist in American history. That was voted upon by the U.S. Senate, passed 98-0, I believe. When you go to Statuary Hall in Congress, you are saluting two Confederates, those particular statues. And you know, people really don't understand how deeply rooted this stuff is in this state, in the psyche of people, and of course, you know, in a state where you have the Confederate emblem that is on the state flag.
The last state of the Union that's still bearing the Confederate emblem, but you know, they say the South will rise again, but it's going to be red, black, and green and with a black fist. Because that's what's about to happen. You've seen it in Georgia. You've seen it in Florida. You've seen Beto O'Rourke do something completely unexpected in Texas. You've seen the possibility in North Carolina with my colleague, Dr. Barber. You're going to see it here as well. Because at the end of the day, for those people who profess to be Christians but act unchristian-like, or they have hell to pay when things change, and things are changing much faster than people recognize. And and you see it with all the venom that they're using to try to hold on as long as they can. But change is happening extremely fast.
I'm obviously wearing a Black Voters Matter shirt from, of course, organization founded by Latasha Brown and Cliff Albright. And of course, they were on the campus of Texas Southern University in Houston. And so, of course, the students there made this color, which is perfect because it matches my Texas A&M color. So, you know, it works. But how do we do with mindset? I was texting a few people, black folks who live here, and they said, Mike Espy has no shot. And I go, wait a minute, hold up. I said, did you look at the general election? Did you see that it was barely 700,000 people who voted in the general for all those candidates, whether from the top of the ticket all the way to the bottom? And they said, yeah, but it's Mississippi. And I said, yeah, but it's 750,000 Democrats in this state. I said, significant number of black folks in this state. I said, you hit 80, 85, 90% turnout, it can happen. No, it can happen. And I was sitting there and I was talking to somebody, I was talking to someone in South Carolina, and they were telling me about same thing, how there's this sort of this just complete mindset that it will never change. It is always going to be the same. There's no way in the world we can change the politics of this state. And so you have generation after generation of black folks. Some of these people are young who literally are giving up, who say it can never change.
Well, you know, our job is to make what is perceived to be impossible possible. And if it's perceived to be impossible, you're going to have a few people lined up. But once you make it possible, everybody going to show up and say, look what we did. And that's okay. That's the standard, right? You know, Stacey Abrams.
Because a whole bunch of people said they marched with King and others. And I'm like, if that many people marched, they wouldn't have had enough room.
They wouldn't have enough room, right? Stacey Abrams, a native of Mississippi. Last year, I heard people, black and white, say there's no way for her to do this. And she broke every barrier you can imagine to get to where she got, only to have it stolen from her, but yet it was possible. If it's possible in Georgia, it's possible in Mississippi, it's possible in Alabama, it's possible across the South.
Well, and the thing that also.
But you remember, they say that black men could never get elected to the White House. And that was in 2007. In 2008, those same people were crying, shouting, or running up and down the aisle.
Well, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And so with this runoff coming up November 27th, what is the NAACP doing to get folks to the polls? What's the infrastructure? What's the plan? Well,
for us, we're targeting what we call infrequent voters. That was in round one. Round two, we're going back out to make sure people go out to vote. We're canvassing, we're phone banking, we're sending direct mail literature. We're doing all the things necessary to make sure people know election is coming up. And I've said it on your show before, elections are like ad campaigns. You know, presidential elections is like a Coca-Cola sized budget. But midterm election is like a RC Cola sized budget. You only know it's there unless you know it. And so it's our job to remind people over and over, go to the polls and vote, because your vote will matter, and this opportunity is crucial for our future.
When you look at this state, very rural, so how are you reaching folks who may not be getting television and radio, but then also giving them access to the polls as well? What's the plan?
That folklore is dead, right? Yes, rural is rural, but we've always operated from a context of reaching out to rural voters. I mean, whether everyone have a device, we have a text messaging system. If you look at the state of Mississippi and you split it in half, I-55 being the center line, you go to Mississippi River, 2/3 of all governance is controlled by black folks, 2/3. Out of that, all of the sheriffs from the top of the state to the bottom of the state, African Americans. There's nonsense that we can't get to people. We can get to people. The resources should be invested to make sure we penetrate more people, because we can do this. Mississippi will have the first African American governor. Mississippi will have the first African American senator. Mississippi will be the first majority black state. The question is, are you going to come after the fact, or are you going to get on board to make it happen now?
And speaking of making that happen, Obviously, you have lots of folks who are doing things. And one of the things that you are making it clear with the NAACP is this idea of infrastructure. I keep making the point when I look at black organizations out here. I've said to Panhellenic groups, I said, if you look at our infrastructure, we arguably have the most sophisticated infrastructure in the black community. What I mean by that is international, national, regional, state, grad, undergrad, and of course all the programs affecting kids elementary, middle school, and high school. I said, but the difference is, what the hell are we doing with it? How are we actually using it and maximizing it? 2+ million members. You might, in some states, in Ohio, there are 120 Panhellenic chapters. I don't know how many chapters of NAACP in Ohio, but again, I'm saying, what the hell are we doing with that level of infrastructure that impacts the betterment of our people? We have to go beyond being insular and just be concerned about the organization.
That's right.
It must be concerned about our people who are not members.
So I took the reins full-time in October of last year. Since that time, I've invested millions in dollars in our database system. We brought on a data science team. We are building out our IT systems. For me, I recognize clearly, being focused here, egocentric organizing fails us every time. Anytime we base our work on a personality, once that personality leaves the scene, we're lost. But community-centric organizing is what sustained us. That's why Dr. King did great things, but it was never in Mississippi. But Mississippi benefited greatest from the civil rights movement because there was an infrastructure. Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, who started here, he left Howard and came here, he talked about organize. Organize no matter whether it's your Sunday school class or in your sorority or fraternity, because it's that level of connectivity that's important. Now, how do we take that connectivity, put it on a technology frame, and start talking to each other around the importance of being civically engaged year-round? That's the role of the NAACP. It's not about the big speech. It's not about the collection plate. It's about making sure as a community our collective consciousness is leveraged so our collective vote is felt.
And obviously, now we're looking at 2020 coming up. So once this Senate race is done, once you have the runoffs in Georgia for Secretary of State, some of the other positions, then of course, again, I tell people all the time, don't just skip to 2020. You're going to have local elections taking place in 2019, school board races, city council races as well. But really, to me, having an extremely strong game plan, infrastructure in place for 2020 that's also organized, that not just, well, you doing your thing and you doing your thing and you doing your thing, well, hey, can I get a check over here to cover this? No. What actually is working?
So next year for us is all about the census. Hard to count areas, making sure there's an accurate count. We have too many jurisdictions that's majority African American that if it's under count, they'll be robbed of the federal appropriations to maintain the roads and the bridges, like the city of Jackson. So the very same areas we targeted for this year elections, and when we do the mapping overlay, and we brought in a GIS operator, hard to count areas in our communities, we're going to have canvassers going out to make sure people fill out their census forms. That is a part of the infrastructure. Civic engagement is not just about electing someone to office. It's about making sure we have an agenda to communicate with that person. It's making sure that we're punching the lever at all levels of opportunity so people can understand that they're owners of government, not victims of government. And for NAACP, under my tenure, the next 5 years, there are benchmark opportunities. Midterm election we just completed. The census, go to presidential and redistricting back to midterm elections. That's the next 5 years of engagement for the NAACP.
So there's somebody sitting out there, they're young, they're middle aged, they're old, and they're saying, all right, this runoff is 8 days away. You know what, I really got better things to do. Make the argument to them why they can't sit it out.
But you add it up. If you are in school, what about your student loans? We got to deal with the student loan debt crisis that's looming. The housing crisis is half the size of the student loan crisis that's about to hit you. If you're driving a car and you hit a pothole, you got to get that tire fixed. You shouldn't have to, because if your tax dollars were leveraged properly, there would be a pothole. If your parents are on Social Security or the need of Medicaid and Medicare, you need to be at the polls to support it, because if you don't, you got to pay for it. You got to watch them suffer. Everything you can think of, from the water we drink, Flint, Michigan, to the air we breathe, to the schools our kids go to, all impacted by this and all of the elections. Can't afford to sit it out. Can't afford to sit any of these elections out.
All right, then. Derek Johnson, always good to chat with you. Folks, what's about to happen is, one, this conversation will be done, but we're actually going to go upstairs and actually get a tour of the office there, office where, of course, Medgar Evers did his work as field secretary for the NAACP. Also, we got a few interviews taking place a little bit later. And so we want you to hopefully, first of all, hope you're enjoying this, but not only that, providing you a perspective that nobody else is giving you. It's one thing, I think, to talk about these things sitting in D.C. or New York or some other place, but it's different to actually be on the ground, talking with people, getting an understanding of what's happening. Also, I'm going to be visiting the SP campaign office, talking with his campaign manager. I mean, we'll also be, while we're here, talking to Pastor Jerry Young, who runs the National Baptist Convention USA, getting his thoughts and perspective. He's right here in Jackson, Mississippi as well. Tomorrow, you're going to have actually a big prayer rally at 11 a.m. that we're going to be carrying live as well, so you don't want to miss that. And then we got some other great things planned as well tomorrow. Plus, don't forget, 6 p.m. Eastern, we'll be broadcasting Roland Martin Unfiltered here as well. So for all the folks at Be Woke Vote, Roland Martin Unfiltered, we're about to end this conversation, and we'll be coming back live in just a little bit. You guys take care. Holla.